The HOA fined me for the color of my mailbox, the length of my grass, and even the bird feeder I used. But they made a critical mistake when they threatened to fine me over my daughter's wheelchair ramp. They had no idea that for the last 10 years I've had a passion project, studying the loopholes in every single one of their bylaws, and I was about to use that knowledge to tear their entire operation down from the inside. What would you do if your homeowners association went after your family? Let me know in the comments. And if you love stories about bullies getting what they deserve, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of justice. Trust me, you want to see how this ends. My name is Mark Henderson, and really, I'm the kind of guy you'd never notice. I'm an accountant. My world is spreadsheets, balanced ledgers, and that quiet satisfaction when the numbers just add up. I'm not a fighter, I'm not a troublemaker, I'm a dad, and my whole world is my daughter, Lily. We live in a modest two-story house in a neighborhood called Maple Creek Estates. On the surface, it's the suburban dream. The lawns are all a perfect uniform green. The houses are painted in a palette of tastefully boring earth tones, and there's a sense of order in the air. But this house, it's more than just siding and drywall to me. It was my late wife Sarah's dream. I remember the day we first saw it. Sarah walked through the front door, and her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since our wedding. She ran her hand along the banister, looked out the big picture window at the backyard, and turned to me with a smile that could have powered the whole town. "This is it, Mark," she said, her voice so certain there was no room to argue. "This is where we'll watch our family grow." And we bought it. For 5 wonderful years, it was everything she'd dreamed of. It was the home where we brought Lily back from the hospital, the backyard where I pushed her on the swings Sarah picked out, the living room where we celebrated everything. Every corner of this house is soaked in her memory. After she passed, I made a silent promise to her and to myself that I'd raise our daughter in this house, surrounded by the love that built it. It was the one piece of Sarah I had left, and I would protect it with everything I have. Lily is my entire world. She was born with a degenerative condition that affects her mobility, and by 10 she was mostly using a wheelchair, but her spirit, it's brighter than 1,000 suns. She has her mother's smile and my stubborn streak. She faces every day with a grace and humor that just leaves me in awe. When we first moved in, the homeowners association, run by a board of self-important neighbors, seemed like a harmless, if slightly annoying, part of the deal. They were there to make sure nobody painted their house hot pink or let their yard turn into a jungle. The president was a woman named Brenda, a stern-faced retiree with way too much time on her hands. I figured as long as I mowed the lawn and brought the trash cans in on time, we'd be fine. I couldn't have been more wrong. The war didn't start with a bang. It started with a whisper, a single crisp white envelope in my mailbox. The first notice was for the length of my grass. Apparently, their laser measuring device said it was 1/4 of an inch over the 4-inch limit. It was ridiculous, but I just wanted to live in peace, so I mowed it that night. A week later, another envelope. This time, my trash can was at the curb for a full 15 minutes past the 8 p.m. deadline. That'll be $25. I paid it without a fight, but that's when I started to get a weird feeling. It felt less like rule enforcement and more like I was being watched. Then came the mailbox incident. Brenda, in her infinite wisdom, had decided that all mailboxes must now be painted heritage black, a specific shade from a specific brand. My mailbox, which was already black, was apparently midnight black, a clearly rebellious shade. I got a formal notice and a $50 fine. To keep the peace, I bought the approved paint and spent a Saturday repainting a perfectly good mailbox. The next week, another envelope. My heart sank. Another fine, $75. The violation, the heritage black paint I'd just applied was, and I quote, exhibiting excessive glossiness not in keeping with the community's matte aesthetic. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. I had somehow become Brenda's new project, Her campaign of petty tyranny just escalated. My daughter, Lily, loves watching birds. To bring a little joy to her mornings, I put up a simple wooden bird feeder in the front yard. Sure enough, the dreaded white envelope appeared. The feeder was not of an approved design, and get this, was attracting undesirable avian species, which I later learned was HOA speak for sparrows and finches. The feeder had to go, and I got $100 fine. The look on Lily's face when I took it down felt like a punch to the gut. Next up, Christmas lights. I'm not a big display guy, but I put up a single, elegant string of white lights along the roofline. Classic, tasteful, Brenda disagreed. I got a notice in mid-December for an excessive and ostentatious holiday display. Then, on January 17th, 2 days after the takedown deadline, another notice came with a staggering $250 fine. That was it. I'd had enough. I decided to appeal and went to the next HOA meeting. Brenda sat at the head of the table, flanked by her 2 cronies, a sour-faced man named Gary and a woman, Carol, who just nodded at everything Brenda said. The room was full of other homeowners, all just staring at their laps, resigned to their fate. I calmly presented my case. I explained how absurd the fines were, how personal it all felt. Brenda listened with this smug, condescending smirk. When I finished, she didn't miss a beat. "The rules are the rules, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "They exist to protect our property values. They apply to everyone." I looked around the room for some backup, but nobody would meet my eye. They were all too scared. They had their own stories of Brenda's tyranny, fines for kids' toys, violations for the wrong kind of mulch. They were all bullied into silence. Walking home that night, a cold fury started to build in my chest. Peace wasn't an option. Logic was useless. Brenda wasn't a manager. She was a dictator. And that was the night I decided to stop playing her game. I went online and downloaded all 312 pages of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions for Maple Creek Estates. As an accountant, I'm used to dense, boring documents. This was just a different kind of ledger, so I started reading. Every night, after Lily was asleep, I'd sit at my desk with a highlighter and a pot of coffee and just dive in. I read about easements and encumbrances, committees and assessments. I cross-referenced clauses, made notes, and built a spreadsheet of every single bylaw. It became my obsession. In those pages, buried under decades of bureaucratic sludge, I started finding them. Inconsistencies, contradictions, and forgotten clauses. Loopholes. Brenda thought the bylaws were her sword. She had no idea I was about to turn them into my weapon. The turning point, the moment this quiet war went nuclear, had nothing to do with mailboxes or Christmas lights. It had everything to do with Lily. Her condition was progressing, and her doctors were clear. She needed a permanent wheelchair ramp. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a necessity for her safety and her independence. It broke my heart to see her struggle just to get in and out of her own home. So I did everything by the book. I hired a contractor. I got the city permits. I had professional plans drawn up for a ramp that matched the house perfectly. And, as required, I submitted the whole package to the Architectural Review Committee, headed by, you guessed it, Brenda. I expected a quick approval. This was a medical necessity, not a tiki bar. The denial letter that came a week later felt like a physical blow. It was cold and clinical. The proposed modification is not in keeping with the aesthetic harmony of the community, it said. Request denied. I was stunned. I immediately requested a meeting and found Brenda at the clubhouse. I explained that this was a required medical accommodation, not some whim. She looked at me with cold, dead eyes. A ramp would be an eyesore, Mark, she said without a hint of sympathy. It suggests infirmity. It brings down the look of the neighborhood. We can't make exceptions. If we make one for you, everyone will want one. The sheer cruelty of that statement left me speechless. Everyone will want one. I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Brenda, this is for my daughter. She can't get into her house safely. Her expression never changed. The board has made its decision. But Brenda couldn't resist twisting the knife. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived, a formal notice to cease and desist. It said that if I started building any unapproved structure, I'd be fined $500 a day. And if I built the ramp anyway, the HOA would put a lien on my home and start foreclosure proceedings to have it torn down. I stood there in my hallway, the letter trembling in my hand. This was no longer about paint colors. This was about cruelty. They were threatening to take my home, the home I promised Sarah I'd protect, my daughter's sanctuary, all because a piece of medical equipment was an eyesore. They were using my daughter's disability to bully me. In that moment, something inside me just snapped. The quiet accountant was gone. The guy who just wanted to be a good neighbor vanished. All that was left was a father whose child had just been threatened by a petty tyrant in a beige pantsuit. The time for being quiet was over. The time for studying was done. It was time to act. It was time to burn the whole rotten structure to the ground using their own rulebook. Brenda had pushed too far. For the next month, I went dark. I became the model resident. No angry emails, no furious phone calls. I paid the glossy, mailbox fine to Brenda. It must have looked like I'd finally been broken. She saw my silence as surrender. It was the calm before the storm. My quiet home office had become a war room. My first move was to call a special meeting of the homeowners. I found a clause she'd long forgotten, Bylaw 17B. It stated any homeowner could call a special meeting with a petition signed by just 15% of the members. Getting those signatures was an eye-opener. I spent a week knocking on doors. I didn't lead with my anger. I just listened. I heard stories of fines for hairline cracks in driveways, warnings about kids' chalk drawings, threats over vegetable gardens. For every story I heard, I shared mine about the ramp. I wasn't just collecting signatures, I was building an army. I got signatures from nearly 40% of the homeowners. Brenda was legally forced to hold the meeting, and she was furious. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed, standing room only. The air was thick with tension. Brenda and her board sat at the front, trying to look composed, but I could see the tightness in her jaw. I walked to the front, connected my laptop to a projector, and took a breath. Good evening, everyone. I began. Brenda, before we start, could you please confirm for the record that all current board members have filed their annual conflict of interest forms as required by Bylaw 3? See? A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Brenda was caught off guard. Of course we have, she snapped. Excellent, I said, and clicked a button. A public record from the state's business registry appeared on the screen. Then maybe you can explain why the company with the exclusive landscaping contract for Maple Creek, worth over $100,000 a year, is a company called Lawn and Order, which happens to be registered to your brother-in-law, Gary. A collective gasp. Brenda's face went white, and I continued, clicking to the next slide, why the company designated as the sole provider for mailbox repainting, Perfect Hues Painting, is owned by your cousin, Carol. These seem like pretty big conflicts of interest to leave off your disclosure forms. They were sputtering, but I didn't give them a chance. Now, let's talk about my daughter's wheelchair ramp, I said, my voice rising. You denied it for aesthetic harmony, but you seem to have missed Bylaw 22F, which states that all HOA regulations are subordinate to federal and state disability access laws, specifically the Fair Housing Act. The FHA makes it illegal to deny a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability. Your denial wasn't just a violation of our bylaws, Brenda. It was a violation of federal law. I turned to the stunned homeowners. For years, this board has used vague rules to collect fines, but did you know, according to Bylaw 29, Any fine over $200 has to be approved by a majority vote at a homeowner meeting. So how many of you voted for my $250 fine for Christmas lights? How many of you voted for Mrs. Davis's $300 fine for planting the wrong kind of roses? A dead silence. People were looking at each other, the gears finally turning. But I saved the best for last, I announced. I clicked to my final slide. It was a scan of a dusty, typewritten page. RCC and RS were originally filed with the county in 1988. I took a trip to the county records office and found something fascinating. It's called a sunset clause. Article 42, Section 3. I paused, letting everyone lean in. It states, and I quote, "These covenants, conditions, and restrictions shall remain in full force and effect for a period of 35 years, at which point they will expire unless formally reviewed, updated, and re-ratified by a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners." I looked right at Brenda, whose face had crumbled into a mask of pure horror. That 35th anniversary, I declared, was 6 months ago. No review was conducted, no meeting was held, no vote was taken. I let the words hang in the air before delivering the final blow. Which means, as of 6 months ago, the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association has been operating without any legal authority whatsoever. Every fine you've levied, every notice you've sent, every lien you've threatened, has been completely and utterly unenforceable. For about 5 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then the room erupted. It wasn't just talking, it was a roar. A tidal wave of frustration from years of petty tyranny was finally unleashed. People were on their feet, shouting, demanding answers, waving their own violation notices in the air. Brenda, Gary, and Carol sat frozen at the head table, their faces ashen. Brenda opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. Her gavel, her symbol of power, lay untouched. Her authority had vanished in an instant. From the back of the room, someone shouted, "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the entire board." Seconded, yelled about half the room. What followed was swift and brutal. The vote to remove Brenda and her cronies was nearly unanimous. They had to gather their papers and do a walk of shame out of the clubhouse while people laughed and muttered at them. Their reign was over. In the chaos, an interim committee was formed right there on the spot. To my surprise, I was asked to serve as an advisor. The very first act of this new committee was to declare a total moratorium on all existing fines and schedule meetings to draft an entirely new and much more reasonable set of rules. The next week, contractors showed up at my house and built my daughter's ramp. It was sturdy, safe, and looked great. The first time Lily wheeled herself up to our front door, a look of pure, triumphant independence on her face, I felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me over. It was more than just a ramp. It was a monument to our victory. The fallout for Brenda and her board was severe. They were facing a flood of legal challenges from homeowners demanding reimbursement for years of illegal fines. The state's Attorney General's office even opened an investigation into their fraud and conflicts of interest. Their little kingdom had crumbled, but the biggest change wasn't financial. It was the feeling in Maple Creek Estates. The cloud of fear was gone. Neighbors started talking to each other again. We had a block party last weekend, the first in over a decade. Kids' chalk drawings reappeared on the sidewalks. The neighborhood felt alive again. We became a community, not just a collection of houses under a microscope. And it all happened because they pushed a quiet accountant too far. They threatened his home, they targeted his daughter, and they forgot the most important rule. Even the quietest person has a breaking point. So that's the story of how a quiet, suburban dad dismantled a corrupt HOA with their own rulebook. Every community has its bullies, but sometimes all it takes is one person to finally say enough. Have you ever had a crazy run-in with an HOA? Share your story in the comments, and if you enjoyed this tale of sweet, bureaucratic revenge, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more.